Ever stop and think about what you're really made of? I don't mean philosophically, I mean chemically. What are the actual fundamental parts that build everything from a tiny microbe to a giant blue whale? Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that, the essential building blocks of all living things, biomolecules.
Right, so we all know there's a difference between something that's alive and something that isn't. But what is that difference, really? When you get down to the most basic chemical level, that's the mystery we're going to try to solve today.
Okay, let's put it this way. If you could analyze every single atom in a rock and compare it to every atom in a human being, what would you find? The answer, it turns out, is both way simpler and way more profound than you might imagine.
And here's what's so wild. The ingredients are pretty much the same. The elements that make up the Earth's crust are the same ones that make up your body. The crucial difference isn't the what, it's the how much. I mean, just look at carbon. It's barely a trace element in the crust, but it makes it nearly a fifth of the human body. Life isn't built from some rare, exotic elements. It's made of the most common stuff around, just mixed together in a completely different recipe.
So, how in the world do scientists actually figure out what's inside a living thing? Well, we move from the mystery to the investigation, and it involves a chemical process that's, believe it or not, surprisingly straightforward. It really just starts by taking a piece of living tissue, say a bit of liver, and grinding it up with trichloroacetic acid until you have this thick slurry. Then you strain that slurry through a simple cheesecloth. Seriously. And that one simple step is the key, because it perfectly separates all the chemical components into two very different groups. What this gives us are two distinct groups. The liquid that actually filters through the cloth is called the acid-soluble pool. And all the stuff that gets left behind in the cheesecloth, that's the acid-insoluble fraction. And hidden within these two samples, well, that's where we find all the chemical secrets of life. So let's start with that first group, the stuff that passed right through, the acid-soluble pool. This is where we find the small stuff, the micromolecules. You can think of these as the individual Lego bricks that life uses to build all of its incredible structures. First up, we've got amino acids. There are 20 common types, and these are the absolute building blocks of proteins. Each one has a similar core structure, but then it has this unique side piece, what scientists call an R group, and that's what gives each one its own distinct chemical personality. Next, we find sugars, which you probably know as carbohydrates. Think of molecules like glucose. These are the primary, fast-burning fuel for our cells. Everything from a muscle contracting to a neuron firing, these simple sugars are providing the instant energy that makes it all happen. They are, quite literally, the high-octane energy currency of life. And finally, in this group, we find these absolutely critical molecules, nitrogen bases. If you think of life as a story, these are the letters of the alphabet. The 5 key bases, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and uracil are the chemical letters that spell out the entire instruction manual for building and running a whole organism. All right, let's move over to the other fraction, the acid-insoluble stuff that got left behind in the cheesecloth. This is where we find the giants, the biomacromolecules. If the micromolecules were the individual Lego bricks, these are the massive, complex castles and spaceships they build. These are our major suspects in the story of life. Now, this fraction has 4 main players: proteins, polysaccharides, nucleic acids, and lipids. And most of these are true giants, with molecular weights in the tens of thousands of daltons, which is just a unit for measuring atomic mass. But hang on a second. One of these is not like the others. And this brings us to a really interesting puzzle. Lipids, fats and oils, they actually aren't that big. Their molecular weight is less than 800 daltons, so technically, they should be micromolecules. So what in the world are they doing in the macromolecule group? Well, the solution has nothing to do with their size. It's all about their behavior. See, lipids make up a huge part of our cell membranes. When we grind up the tissue, those membranes shatter into these tiny little water-hating bubbles called vesicles. And because they don't dissolve in water, they just can't pass through the cheesecloth, so they get trapped with the true giants. Lipids aren't macromolecules by size, they're macromolecules by circumstance. Now let's look at polysaccharides. These are just long chains of sugars all linked together, and this is a perfect example of how structure dictates function. Look at glycogen on the left. It's super branched, which lets animals quickly break it down for a burst of energy. Now look at cellulose on the right. It forms these straight, rigid fibers, making it the perfect building material for plants. Same building blocks, totally different jobs. Okay, now for the main event.
Of all the biomacromolecules, proteins are by far the most diverse and the most dynamic. They are the true workforce of the cell, carrying out pretty much every single task that's necessary for life. So let's see how they're built.
It all starts with the primary structure. This is simply the sequence of amino acids, one after another, like beads on a string. And this sequence is everything. It dictates all the folding that's about to happen. It basically spells out what the final protein is going to become. Of course, that string of amino acids doesn't stay straight for long. It almost immediately starts to fold into these local, repeating patterns. The most famous one is called the alpha helix, which you can see here. It looks kind of like a revolving staircase. This is the secondary structure. And then that whole chain folds up on itself into a complex, unique, three-dimensional shape. It's often compared to a hollow woolen ball. This is the tertiary structure. And you have to understand, this final 3D shape is absolutely critical, because in biology, a protein's form is its function. End of story. And for some proteins, there's one final level, the quaternary structure. This is where multiple individual protein chains all assemble into one massive functioning complex. The classic example is hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in your blood. It's actually 4 separate protein subunits all working together as a single finely tuned machine. So what do these incredible little machines actually do? Pretty much everything. I mean, just look at this list. They provide structure, like collagen in our skin. They act as catalysts, like the digestive enzyme trypsin. They carry signals, like the hormone insulin. And they defend the body, like antibodies do. It's an unbelievably versatile toolkit for life. And the sheer scale of this is just staggering. Listen to this. Collagen is the most abundant protein in the animal world, but an enzyme in plants called rubisco is the most abundant protein in the entire biosphere. Proteins aren't just a part of life. In so many ways, they are life in action. So we've gone on this journey from the simple chemical elements you'd find in the Earth's crust all the way to the most complex molecular machines in the known universe. We've seen that it's all built from the same basic set of ingredients, just rearranged in these spectacular ways. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. How does this simple chemical Lego set build the near infinite variety and complexity that we call life?